James Tabor will say, this isn't bad stuff, but if you try to look at the Hebrew Bible in the context of this philosophy, you're not going to get there. So really, the biggest question is, why is there anything at all? You know, many great people, Parmenides, all the way up to Leibniz, I'm going to talk about. Parmenides created the study of metaphysics. Now, people get confused when they hear that term if they don't know what it means. Is it like beyond physics? Kinda. Metaphysics is definitely the study of existence. And Maimonides famously said, after you study physics, study metaphysics, and then I will teach you about the Bible, just to let you know. So there's something that really they came up with, and this came up through a lot of different philosophers through the years. It's called the contingency of existence. Everything in the universe, everything that you see is contingent, and it could not have existed without other things. I couldn't be here unless my mom and dad met and had me. They couldn't have been there unless their mom and dad met and had them. And on, and it goes on into infinitum. So there was no creation; it always existed. No, that's not the case. There was an Adam and Eve, and it requires it, and that required a necessary being. So the necessity of a grounding cause. So there's two types of beings in this study: contingent beings, which is everybody and everything. This is a contingent thing. It not only had to be water, but there had to be someone who made a plastic bottle and bottled it, and there had to be someone who did all the mining and everything for the plastic, petroleum use, so on and so forth. So Leibniz argues for necessary being, and something that exists by nature, uncaused, self-existent. I'm going to give you a clue right now. What was before God? There was nothing. God always was. So when we ask about time, it's the wrong question to ask. There was a beginning to this universe. If you're a scientist, you might call it the Big Bang, but there was a beginning. And that causal effect, we now know, was something that required massive conscience, intelligence, and that's the Almighty. So the Most High, the Creator, there is nothing like that being, whatever that is, in my talk. So as I said before, Maimonides told you, hey, once you're done studying physics and then you get into metaphysics, then I'll teach you about God. And that's really a beautiful thing. He believed that the laws given presume an intellectual development and metaphysical reflection. So in a theological affirmation from a Hebrew tradition, creation is not a brute fact. It is an intentional act of a personal creator. That's why you got to throw away the Greco-Roman. The doctrine of creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing, affirms God as a source, not as part of the universe. And existence is a gift brought forth by divine will and not necessity. I give you some Genesis, and the Psalms talk about this. And Thomas Aquinas, who is a great Christian philosopher, God is not a being, but being itself, the foundations of all existence. And this aligns with God's self-revelation at Sinai. And I'll explain that after the vision or the revelation that I got by studying. No one talked to me. I just kind of really got out of it because it was just an amazing thing. I have a few notes here that I wanted to talk about. Since Ross gave me the, I can talk about the New Testament a little bit. So what is truth? We all know who said that in the New Testament. It was Pilate. I was going to quote Jack Nicholson, but I'm not going to quote that here, but I will quote it at the end. So the classical definition of truth is pretty much, it's seen as the correspondence between statements and reality. And we know this isn't the real truth. because 5 people could witness a car crash and you're going to get 5 slightly different answers. And so really in philosophical, we look at coherence theory, we look at the pragmatic theory, truth as it was helpful in practice. We were talking about farmers during the break. Farmers are very full of pragmatic theory. They knew what way to plant, they knew how to take care of their animals, and it was a truth that became self-evident. Constructivist view, truth is a product of language and social constructs. So when Bob Dylan wrote, "It's okay, Ma, I'm only bleeding," when he talked about those things, what truth was he speaking about? So that's a construct of things. Each of it captures an essence of the truth, but it really is not a complete definition. And then, of course, there's a theological perspective. Truth is a relational and moral, and it's not just factual. That, to me, is an important thing. It's also rooted in divine faithfulness and integrity in traditions like the Hebrew Bible, which contains a lot of it. When we talk about truth in the Hebrew way, emet, it means more than factual correctness. It implies how it's used in context. It's very reliable and has a covenantal faithfulness. It is an attribute of God, Emunah, and it's manifested in God's laws, promises, and actions. And truth is to be lived through justice, compassion, and fidelity. And we see this in the Psalms. Zechariah talks about it. There's also a moral and relational dimension. Living truth means aligning with God's will and ethical responsibility. Truth is a way of being, not just a belief or a statement. Truth is always, unfortunately, always changing. As we are given more understanding, it changes with us. I've spoken before about the levels of consciousness, and this is an important thing. It is believed in science that all living things have a level of consciousness. Even if it's grass, it's extremely low, but it's there. And as we climb up the ladder, and it's gray, as we climb up the scale, we get to what's called sentience. And our dogs and our cats are sentient beings, and we're sentient beings. Then we go further, and we get to what's called sapience. We're called Homo sapiens. In fact, our subspecies is Homo sapiens sapien. We are aware that we are aware. We think of the past and the future. We think of things like, why are we here? Think about that for a moment. Why are we here? What is there a purpose to life? Does it have any meaning? A lot of people have a lot of ideas on that. So in finding truth, there has to be a necessary level of epistemic humility, and we have limited understanding, and truth requires reverence. So if we were to meet the Most High like Moses, we understand. He said, "Take your shoes off; you're on holy ground." You're encountering a being that is way beyond your comprehension. Also, it's echoed in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. We sense eternity, but cannot fully comprehend divine works. And that's a deep statement right there. You know, when you kind of read through these, you kind of get, used to all the, and to me, this explains exactly what I believe. So what is truth? It's a journey. It's more than a static concept. It's dynamic and multifaceted. There are many aspects of truth. It's found in reason, it's found in experience, suffering, obedience, love, and divine relationship. I've found more truth in my suffering in my life than I can believe happened. I've found truth by being obedient. I find truth in love. Love, as we know from the song, is a many-splendored thing. It's much bigger than romance, right? You love your parents. You love your neighbors. You love the other people in your life. It's all different. So to me, ultimately, seeking truth is seeking God, the source and the embodiment of truth. So when Pilate asked Jesus, what is the truth? Do you remember what Jesus said before then in the book of John, chapter 18? I'm really bad with the New Testament, forgive me. He said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, I have come to bear witness to the truth. And Pilate famously asked him, what is truth? Wow. And if Jack Nicholson was playing Jesus, he'd say, the truth. You can't handle the truth. Sorry, I had to say that because it's the truth. It is the truth. What is the truth? So when we study knowing, we get into what's called epistemology. And so there, I won't go through all these. It's in my paper. It's also on academia.edu under my name there. It's the nature and sources of knowledge that we can look at. It's the diverse domains of truth. Is truth constructed, discovered, or revealed? One of the greatest true languages in the world is mathematics. And there's a debate. Is it created or discovered? And that's a philosophical argument we're not getting into. Of course, in the biblical epistemology, it's as a relational and moral issues. So we know that da'at is relational and covenantal and grounded in the reverence and ethical living. So true knowledge is lived out through humility, moral integrity, and trust in the divine, making also epistemology a spiritual discipline. This is also, if you look up epistemology, you'll get physicists talking, philosophers talking, but I've kind of honed it for what we're looking at here today. So ontology is the structure of being, and ontology can be used in medicine and other things as well, but it's really investigates the nature of existence. So on top of the epistemology is the ontology and trying to understand what exists, how it exists, and why. You've heard from certain people today in theoretical physics that maybe this is all just a simulation. Maybe it is, but it seems real, especially if you fall out of a 3-story building and hit the pavement. It seems real to you. And of course, in ontology, we come up with a concept of contingent versus necessary beings. And this is really something I'm going to go through the proof that in a picture form about what this really means. There's also, from the philosophical and theological integration, a lot of people came up with these things about how to explain this. And so it's really a beautiful issue. Well, one of the biggest things that comes up to me is a new way of looking at Exodus chapter 3. And what is that new way? When Moses asks God what his name is, he doesn't really give him his name at first, does he? He says, I am that I am. That's the definition of a necessary being. I never looked at it that way. He said who he was. He never held that back from people. I am that I am. I'm that necessary being. I started everything. And you're asking me my name? Almost an arrogant response, but a true response. And then later he gives the name, the Yud He Vav He, which is not what he said at first. That to me is a big deal. There's another problem in my, history and my past with trying to understand the Bible and everything else. It started in 1968. I've said this before, but I was in the Catholic Church and we sat in the back. My mom and dad were very humble. And we walked out after the Mass. And I got into the aisle and I looked up at the crucifix. And I stopped. 9 years old. My mother said, "What's wrong, David?" I said, "Mommy?" She said, "Yes." I said, "How do you know he's God?" You just called him God. That was my start. And from there, I wasn't a Catholic much longer. And thank you to the Most High that my mom and dad embraced that. And a man who worked in a factory with my dad named James Stocker, who had left the Church of Christ, came and would just reason with us about the Bible. By the time I was 13, I had the KJV Forget that Catholic Bible. I had the KJV. And I was in my mom and dad's bedroom preaching to them about what the Bible really was about at the age of 13. Then I figured out what women were, and that it changed for a while. But really, faith versus knowledge. Be careful. You know, I talked about epistemic humility. Be careful about mixing the two. We have faith, absolutely. We have knowledge, empirical knowledge about things, absolutely. But when you start blurring the borders of what is your faith versus your knowledge, you can come up with things that are bad, like dogmas. Hate to mention my dad again, but he came up with the DDTs. Dogmas, doctrines, and traditions, and they ruin religion. My dad would preach that to people, and they didn't like what he was preaching. Sorry. So I still look at other people, even a Catholic here. St. Thomas Aquinas said, God is tamquam ignotum. No thought can contain him, no words can express him. He is beyond anything we can intellectualize or imagine. If we go to the East in Taoism, Lao Tzu said, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is eternally real. These people thought about these things, and I happen to agree with them. I brought up before epistemic humility, I'm saying this for myself. The issue is quite simple. True faith embraces mystery and growth. You got a lot of mystery watching Ross. You don't know what he's going to talk about next. And he questions everything. And that's true faith. When you shut down and say, I know everything, it becomes dogmatism. And that leads to intellectual stagnation. I'm sorry to say those things. Some people like that solid ground. I've spoken about that before to people. And I remember when I was living in Los Angeles, trying to be a rock star. And I worked at this place where I could repair circuit boards so I could make enough money to keep me fed and Patty. And I was standing, I never had an earthquake. I was standing on a cement floor. And we had a 5.7 size earthquake. And the ground turned to like rubber. It didn't shake, it was like rubber. And I'm like, what's this? When you talk to people about their faith, they've been a Baptist their whole life. You're shaking that floor. They're like, what are you talking about? And truth is also asymptotic. And I'm a mathematician, so forgive me. You know what an asymptote is? So if you have a value, say 10, and you have a function that almost gets to 10 but never gets there, that's called an asymptote. So asymptotically, it almost gets there, but in an infinity, it'll still never get there. It'll get closer, but it'll never be 10. And that's the way I look at truth. You can build your truth up and have a lot of truth, but you will never understand all of the truth in the world, in my opinion. So epistemic humility, I see people that really wear it as a badge. I want to point out Ralph Bunton because he's very knowledgeable, but he's also very humble when he speaks. And I think that's an important thing. The other thing is, I don't know when y'all kind of started believing in more of the Torah faith. But I remember when I started reading all these rules, I went to bed thinking, am I allowed to breathe on the Sabbath? You know, I mean, I'm like, what? And epistemic humility came in and said, that's not what God wanted. Remember that guy? Jesus, he said, Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So a little bit more about epistemic humility, the moral danger of certainty. Believe me, history shows that unexamined certainty can lead to atrocities, and humility prevents moral blindness. Can you imagine in Nazi Germany, the average Nazi or average German having to become a Nazi? Well, everyone's a Nazi. And you probably remember your mom saying, Mom, their parents let them do what they're going to do, and I'm going to go with them. And my mom would say, Dave, if they jumped off a cliff, would you jump off with them? That kind of, and it's true. I probably would have at some time. I came close. Also, I think open-mindedness is an ethical imperative. You see this with Ross's teachings. He's open-minded about what does the book really say and what doesn't it say. So when you think you know everything, you've stopped learning. Wisdom lies in awareness of limitation. And this is one of my favorite quotes. The illusion of full knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance itself, because it is. So epistemic humility is not just intellectual, it is moral, spiritual, and essential for peace and wisdom. Another thing that I have considered over my life with these things is the spiritual growth factors. So the spirit has to grow too, and we have to rise. So truth is a formation. In existential and spiritual context, truth is not just information, but a transformative process that reshapes the seeker. I am different for seeking the truth, and I can't look back. You know that. Like once you know something, you can't go back and do what you did. I walk back into a Catholic church when someone has a funeral or a marriage out of respect, but there's no way I could go back to that way of faith when I was 9 years old and questioned it. And many other things. Beyond the facts, truth is not static or reducible to data. It's dynamic, it's personal, and it's tied to moral and spiritual development. Existential knowing. The truth involves the transformation of the knower, how one is changed by the act of seeking and encountering the truth. It's kind of a corollary to the quantum wave function, right? The quantum wave function, we know you cannot know the exact speed or place of a particle. But as soon, it's probabilistic. As soon as you view it, the wave function collapses and we know exactly where it is. Why? Because there was consciousness involved? Absolutely. And if you look at the great people like Niels Bohr, John von Neumann, the greats that invented this stuff, Albert Einstein, man, truth is stranger than a fiction. You look at something and it changes? What are you, some sort of God? All right. And so in a religious dimension, in faith tradition, truth is mediated through trust, commitment, and moral practice, and not merely your intellectual grasp. Sometimes I hear, Ross was kind of alluding to this morning, sometimes I hear people speak that are so brilliant, as PhDs in, the context of the Bible. I don't even know what they're saying. And I kind of almost think they don't know what they're saying, but they can speak it well. Now, I happen to know some that are brilliant. Dr. James Tabor is brilliant. He does not lord over you his knowledge of his extensive knowledge, especially of the New Testament and of Second Temple Judaism. And he's a great speaker, and he speaks to his audience. And I like that about James. That, and we both love Bob Dylan. And we can talk in terms of that. Anyways, so I'm not saying every intellectual or every, PhD is wrong. But, Feynman said, the great Richard Feynman, the great physicist, said that being a PhD doesn't mean you're intelligent. It just means you went through the process to get it. Some people, like Ross, as far as I'm concerned, he could out-preach any preacher in this whole area, even if they got a doctorate of divinity, because he knows more about the Bible. So it's kind of like in music, Paul McCartney can't read music, but he certainly wrote a few songs that we know. So Da'at Elohim, the knowledge of God. In the Hebrew Bible, true knowledge involves ethical conduct, relational fidelity, and spiritual intimacy. We know, and Lord, I know you know things in my mind that I shouldn't have thought, because you know me. He knows me more than my wife knows me. He knows me more than I know me, and he knows what I'm thinking. And that woman walking there, I mean, she was just, dressed nice. That's all. Sorry, Lord. Then there's the embodied truth. Knowing God means walking in justice, humility, and love. Truth is something one lives, not just understands. And of course, when we integrate that knowing and being, the framework dissolves the Western split between epistemology and ethics, fusing knowledge with moral and spiritual transformation. So another big question is, who or what is the creator? And I thought I knew many times, and you've heard this before, right? The more I know, the more I know I don't know. So this incredible being, the creator, it's not something simple. And I understand the reverence for the name amongst my Jewish friends, right? Look, don't even speak that name if you don't know what you're talking about. I love Nikita, love lady, who signs in sometimes, and she says, it's the congregation of the Most High. I mean, it's the Most High. That's a great way of looking at God. So the creator in the Hebrew Bible is not an abstract cause, but the personal, relational ground of all being, the source of order, reason, morality, and even consciousness itself. I spoke once before about biocentrism, right? So the materialist view starts out that there was physics, then chemistry, then biology, then consciousness. But biocentrism says there was consciousness first. Interesting. I believe that's what it was. So known through revelation and not speculations, God enters history, covenants with humanity, and calls for the ethical and spiritual response. Unlike the impersonal or pantheistic conceptions, the Most High is both transcendent and immanent, inviting a life of reverence, justice, and covenantal fidelity. I think Ross spoke really clearly about the covenant, the 10. If you follow that, you're doing well. So the creator is the ground of all being, the source of order, reason, morality, consciousness, not merely a mechanical first cause. In the Hebrew Bible, the Most High is personal, ethical, and relational, engaging humanity through these covenants in historical action. We have it well written in the Hebrew Bible. Revealed, not abstracted. Contrast with other views, like deism, pantheism, and impersonal force, the physicists want. God is both transcendent and immanent. And human response is central. We are called not just to observe, but to live in love, justice, and fidelity with his covenants. So the argument from contingency from Leibniz was the most famous one. Leibniz was a polymath. He invented calculus at the same time that Isaac Newton did. And when we take calculus today, we use Leibniz's notation. He was an inventor. He was a philosopher. He was a brilliant man. And he came up with this, that when you argue from contingency, I'm contingent on my parents and so forth, this can't be. The universe is contingent. It cannot explain itself. In other words, what was before this universe? Thus, the necessary being must exist as the ultimate cause. We'll go through this proof really quickly. Necessary beings exist by nature and cannot exist and are self-sufficient. So they just are. God just is. I am what I am. It fits. Contingent beings rely on external causes and could fail to exist. Their existence depends on explanation beyond themselves. You can fail to exist. You will fail to exist. I guarantee that. You will fail to exist one day. In the way, as you get older, I'm a senior citizen now, I feel like it's not as far as it used to be. It used to be that was a light weight at the end of the tunnel. And light's getting pretty bright now. The argument concludes that only a necessary being can halt the infinite regress of contingent causes. Got to be careful about putting out too much math, but I drew a graph. So in this graph, we see in the middle, assume infinite regress of contingent causes. There was always somebody to produce a person. So infinite past events, no first cause events. There was no creator. That's what you then say. Then there's no starting point to begin the sequence. But we realize after all proof, reductio ad absurdum, reduction by absurdity, it's impossible to traverse infinite sequence. So a contradiction occurs. What's that contradiction? We're here. We're here. So infinite regress is logically impossible, and there must be a necessary beginning, a necessary force, a necessary being. And it's in my paper. You can read, and I explain all this in much more detail, but I just show you the basic flow of it. So the creator, why the creator of the Hebrew Bible? Why would I care about that creator? Because obviously probably Leibniz viewed the Christian God, and, you know, St. Thomas Aquinas viewed a Christian God. Well, it has a unique vision of God. The God of the Hebrew Bible is distinct for combining transcendence with intimate involvement in human affairs, unlike the other impersonal deities of, say, Aristotle or deism. Ethical monotheism, belief in one God, requires moral responsibility. Justice, mercy, and ethical living are inseparable from true worship. I won't mention names, but you see preachers that preach the word as a Christian, and then you find out their lives are they're just not good people, doing all kinds of bad things. You can't be with the Most High. You can't be like that, because I would say it knows. Please don't take that as, I think it's way beyond him or her. The Most High it's a force to be reckoned with. It's relational and covenantal. God enters into binding covenants with people, showing love and fidelity even when they fail. He's not aloof, but present and committed. Think of the story of David. I mean, that guy was not good. He was a mercenary. He was an adulterer. He did a lot of bad things. And what did God say in 2 Samuel chapter 7? David says to Nathan, and you know the relationship there. Samuel, David, like a mentor. And then Nathan was like the new kid on the block, younger, and him and David didn't get along. You can tell that out, right? So finally, after all this stuff, what happens? Nathan says to David, you're good now with God. He says, I'm going to build a house for God to live in. Nathan said, man, God, he likes you. Go ahead and do that. And then Nathan goes to sleep, and God said, wait a minute, Nathan. I don't like that name because I'm a David. No, Nathan, if heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool, where are you going to build a house for me? And he goes back the next day and said, God had a long talk with me last night, David. Dave said, what did he say? And he told him. And David loses his mind. In the King David movie with Richard Gere, this is a beautiful time. This is a beautiful scene. And he said, but he said he's going to make you a house of people. This guy that did all these bad things, you're going to give him a promise? Yes. So that's the God we serve. I feel I'm going to be saved now. So there's prophetic emphasis. The prophets insist that ritual worship is meaningless without ethical action. So you can slaughter all the lambs you want, but God ain't going to forgive you. Justice, unless you change, it's about you changing your ways, right? We all know that when we want to ask for forgiveness from somebody and repent means not only asking for forgiveness, but changing your ways. God, I'm not going to drink like that anymore till next weekend. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is that you do. He's a redeemer and restorer. God is not only the creator, but also the one who redeems and grieves over injustice and envisions a restored, peaceful future for humanity and creation. The book of Isaiah. The end of that book is beautiful. There'll be no killing or hurting in all of his holy mountain, whatever that means. I think it means a lot more than just some mountain somewhere. Transcendence meets intimacy. This God is both sovereign and personal, holy and just, yet merciful and loving, offering a comprehensive model of divine engagement with the world. Rabbi Friedman, Manis Friedman, I love him. He's a Lubavitch rabbi. I don't agree with everything he says, but he said, you know what? God needs you too. What do you mean? In this relationship that's been created, he needs you. It's love. It's a two-way relationship. It isn't just God. So what are we promised? This is just the truth, and it really focused me as I was studying these things over the last 8 years since my son has passed. The Hebrew Scriptures offer promises not of material ease, but of meaning, justice, redemption, and peace grounded in divine intention. There's the covenantal foundation beginning with the Abrahamic covenant. God's promises extend to all nations and are carried through prophetic visions of global harmony and justice. I don't see that right now when I travel in the Middle East and Central Asia, but God's plan is active through history. History is not random. Divine purposes unfold even through trial, exile, and restoration. And there's an ethical call in the present. Divine promises are not just future-oriented. They demand present, ethical living, justice, integrity, and the care for the oppressed. What are we promised? It is not passive optimism, but preserving trust that empowers courage, resistance to injustice, and faithful endurance. During my time, I've seen young men give their lives to help change that, knowing they were going to die. Spiritual and moral horizon shifts. So believing in God's promises reshapes one's inner world, cultivating patience, which I have to work on, Patty says, resilience, and gratitude, even amid suffering. And believe me, when our son died, we suffered. But the truth became clear. Counter narrative to despair, these promises offer a vision against cynicism and fatalism. Absurdism. Have you ever read about absurdism? You want to kill yourself after you read that. Assuring that each righteous act contributes to God's redemptive plan, no matter how small. I wanted to help that lady across the street, but I was late for work. Participatory redemption. Living by design, divine promise means every act of faith and mercy participates in the unfolding redemption of the world. Then there's the concept of Emunah, living faith, which I really started studying after E.J. Nagel started using that term. I looked into it. So there's a relational trust, an action-oriented faith, lived experience, and it's rooted in language and scripture, and it's not blind or irrational, and it's central to our spiritual integrity, this one-on-one with the Creator. So then what comes after we die? The Hebrew Bible speaks sparingly about the afterlife. Coming out of the Catholic Church, if you've ever been into Sistine Chapel, Jesus is coming back and the world's on fire and, it's fire and brimstone. It didn't come from the Baptists. They might have thought they invented it. It was the Catholics who got it out of the Greeks and Romans. And look, you're going to go to this place and burn forever. It's not, the Hebrew Bible says nothing about that. It's good to scare people. I had a friend who was a drunk once, and I said, "You want to go in hell and burn forever?" I was trying to sober him up, and it worked. but now I think I'd be like, "Let us contemplate these logical things." He'd be like, "Yeah, over a bottle of Jack." So it's a deliberate mystery. Sheol is more of a symbol because the good and the bad go to Sheol. And there are hints of hope, like in Ecclesiastes and in Daniel. But here's my point on all of this. Trusting God, not certainty about the afterlife is central. Job's cry to see God beyond death expresses as existential faith, not theological systemization. I wrote about Job. The God of the Hebrew Bible is not easy to deal with. Job was a man who lived a righteous life, supposedly, and then goes through a lot of bad things in a contest. And in the end, what struck me after reading it so many times was this. Finally, God speaks to him out of a whirlwind. And he doesn't say, hey, brother, I'm glad you made it through. No, he said, were you there when I set the foundations of the universe? When I put the band on Orion? Were you there when I set the foundations of the earth and the sea? He didn't say it. He's like, I'm God. And what did Job say? I'm paraphrasing. I used to listen to who you were, but now I see who you are. And there's a whole paper I wrote on that. Really good stuff. So what comes after we die? I don't know, and I'm proud to say that. The Bible's moral vision is not based on an afterlife, rewards, or punishments. You're going to hell, you're going to heaven, and we don't want to even get into Islam, but on a covenantal duty, reverence for God and justice in the present. There's hope that we have rooted in God's character. I put this in because of what James Tabor told me. He said, I don't know what God wants, but I trust that if he was good enough to make us, I trust that God. Of course, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century said, I would rather, trust in an unknown God these things. So the ultimate affirmation is the God who creates and also remembers and redeems, even in death, the relationship with God will continue. There's reverent restraint. The silence on the afterlife is intentional and sacred, preserving the mystery and resisting both escapism and dogmatism. The Bible isn't that way. Moral urgency in the now. So the Hebrew Bible calls for people to live justly now, trusting that the unseen future rests in the hands of a faithful Creator. And in concluding, the search continues. Life's deepest journey moves through the ignorance, reason, revelation, and faith, and not to final answers, but to wiser, deeper questions. Because once you know enough to ask, you ask deeper questions. Scripture is a path and not a map. The Hebrew Bible offers a way of living, not a fixed blueprint, inviting us to walk with God towards truth, justice, and redemption. As I said about Job's wisdom, the text reminds us that life is wholly dependent on God's Spirit. If he decided to forget about it, it would all go away. Spiritual reflection, these themes call us to contemplate the meaning of his existence, inviting personal reflection on life's purpose and our role into it, meaning it's different for all of us. And faith is a journey. The conclusion then affirms that asking profound questions is essential to the spiritual journey, and that embracing mystery is itself a form of wisdom. And that is my talk today. Thank you.